As we learned during Katrina, it's the aftermath, the flooding and the rains that really causes a devastation and sometimes loss of life. There are estimates of anywhere from 2 to 5 or more people, deaths now attributed to what was Hurricane Harvey. For more on the hurricane, let's bring in our panel. Emily Jashinsky, commentary writer for the Washington Examiner. Mo Alithi, Fox News contributor and a former DNC staffer, now runs Georgetown University's Institute of Politics. And Aaron McPike, White House correspondent for Independent Journal Review. Aaron, in the run-up to this hurricane making landfall, I saw on every network, I saw on every major newspaper, this is the first big natural disaster test for President Trump. And here's a deadly hurricane about to cause widespread damage, and it occurred to me that on some level the media have to make everything into a Trump story.
Well, they do, and you always see these sorts of primers when you go into a big news event like this. I will say that for as much as the media often takes Donald Trump's bait, I would say that in this case, Donald Trump took the bait that the media put out there, and I would point out some of these tweets. Many people are now saying that this is the worst storm hurricane they have ever seen. Good news is that we have great talent on the ground. Wow. Now experts are calling Harvey a once-in-a-500-year flood. We have an all-out effort going and going well. He was playing right into the media's hands there, and I thought that was a little bit over the top on his part.
Well, I think also the president trying to show that he's on the job. The White House releasing pictures of a teleconference between President Trump, who's at Camp David, and his cabinet and other senior officials to show that he's on the job. But if there were to be a federal government disaster or mishap or failure to respond, Emily, on the scale of Katrina, that would be a huge story. But the idea of framing it that way in advance struck me as a little much. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's two things. I think that's absolutely true. I think there's one interesting angle to this, which is that we elected a man who wasn't a politician beforehand, and there is something interesting in that he has no natural disaster experience. And that doesn't happen when you elect politicians. So I think to some extent it was fair, but to the tweets, I actually think if I'm someone who's on the ground in Houston, that's not bothering me. In fact, that's something I want to hear. I want to see the president saying that he's on top of it, tweeting, 10 times, however many times he has. That would actually make me feel a lot better to see the federal government's attention being paid to me.
And Mo, it's early. The next few days are going to be crucial in terms of the rescuing. We're looking now still at the pictures in Houston. But since there hasn't been any criticism so far of FEMA or the federal government response, and obviously the state of Texas is the lead responder here, I'm not seeing any stories saying, well, the administration is doing pretty well so far. Is it only a story if the federal government screws up?
Well, I don't think anyone's really passing judgment on any of the response yet, because we're still in the middle of it. I mean,
right.
Look at these pictures that are just so devastating, and and as was just reported, you see tweets coming from the local officials urging people to stay in place, and that we're trying to get to as many of you as possible. And you see the governor putting out information on where people can donate blood. That kind of stuff. It's happening in real time. And so while I don't think you can pass judgment one way or another, I think the president's taking a little too much credit a little too early. Let's just, what I'd like to see him doing out there is praising the local officials, absolutely, but at the same time supporting them by reinforcing the messages that they are sending. That's what we all need to be focused on right now.
That's absolutely right, and I think that's part of my point, that what I think that the president is doing on Twitter a little bit is look at me, look at me, look at me, I'm paying attention, as opposed to retweeting a local official saying, get out of this area, get indoors, do this, do that, or the other thing.
Well, I'm going to give the president some leeway here because it's it's now being described as a once-in-500-year storm, at least for Texas. At the same time, during Katrina, when all those people were trapped in the Superdome, and it was clear that the rescue efforts were not proceeding as planned, there was plenty of criticism, even as the events were still unfolding. Last thought.
Well, yeah, and so I think there actually are several outlets who have run pieces, saying Trump detours from hurricane tweets to tweet about NAFTA, and there, people are saying Trump used Harvey as cover for the, breaking news that happened on Friday night that was outside of the hurricane. So people are not afraid to be critical of him, which I think is unfair at this point. And there is, some framing on liberal outlets that this has already been a disaster for Donald Trump.